Have you ever wondered what happens when someone used to commanding attention is suddenly told no? Not just a casual no, but a full-on denial of the spectacle they expected to dominate? Imagine you've spent months planning, visualizing, dreaming of the spotlight and the universe. Well, Hollywood says, not today. That was Meghan Markle on the morning of the 93rd annual Hollywood Christmas Parade in 2025, a moment that promised glitz, glamour, and public adoration, but instead became a stage for shock, fury, and unprecedented drama. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This wasn't just a parade. This was Hollywood's ultimate display of pageantry, a glittering spectacle where stars float on elaborate floats, fireworks light up the streets, and cameras chase every wink, every wave, every smile. It's where careers are subtly elevated or quietly diminished. And for Meghan, someone who has always craved both recognition and control, it wasn't just about showing up. She wanted to dominate, to rise above everyone else, literally. Her request was audacious. She wanted to be carried on a palanquin, a lavish, royal-style platform lifted by attendants, making her appear untouchable, untethered, and regal. It was the kind of gesture that historically belongs to queens, monarchs, or figures of ultimate reverence. Not just anyone gets this treatment. And certainly, in Hollywood, there are unspoken hierarchies about who can be elevated above whom. But Meghan, with her blend of celebrity, royal connections, and media influence, apparently felt she deserved it. She didn't just want to participate, she wanted to be a living spectacle. So when the parade organizers heard her request, the answer they delivered was a polite but firm refusal. "We can't accommodate that," they said. For most people, this would have been an unfortunate hiccup, a moment to adjust expectations. For Meghan, however, this was a shock to the system. This was a public denial of her imagined grandeur, a challenge to her sense of entitlement, and an affront to her carefully curated image. And what happened next would be talked about long after the parade ended. Let's take a moment to set the scene. Streets lined with thousands of fans, their faces pressed against barricades, phones raised high to capture every fleeting moment of Hollywood magic. Snow machines puffing clouds of artificial snow, floats glittering with lights and decorations, celebrities waving and blowing kisses, all choreographed with precision. Amid this orchestrated chaos, Meghan arrived not just as a celebrity guest, but as someone with an expectation to be celebrated, elevated, and noticed above all others. From the moment she stepped onto the parade route, you could sense the tension. Behind the cameras, in the security tents, and among the organizers, whispers began. Whispers of her request, whispers of her demeanor, whispers of what might happen if her expectations were not met. Hollywood thrives on spectacle, but it also thrives on order, hierarchy, and reputation. No one had ever demanded a palanquin at this particular parade. And certainly, no one had reacted like Meghan when denied. What made this story so riveting, and why it captured headlines almost immediately, wasn't just the request itself. It was the reaction. Meghan's fury was not contained behind closed doors. It was visible, palpable, and leaked to those nearby. Staffers described scenes of muttered expletives, dramatic gestures, and a near-instantaneous shift in energy. Hollywood, a place accustomed to diva behavior, was caught off guard. Even seasoned organizers, who had dealt with demanding stars for decades, were stunned. They expected disappointment, perhaps a stern word or a frustrated sigh. They did not expect what came next, a public, unmistakable display of anger that would ripple through the parade, the press, and social media. And yet, the story is not merely about anger. It's about perception, power, and the culture of celebrity in 2025. Meghan Markle is a figure who has long walked the line between royalty and stardom, between privilege and scrutiny. Her every action is dissected, every gesture analyzed, every statement spun into headlines. The palanquin incident became a lens through which the public could examine not only Meghan herself, but also the dynamics of Hollywood fame, entitlement, and expectation. Think about it. How often do we witness someone so accustomed to admiration being publicly denied? How often do we see that raw, unfiltered reaction play out in real time, amid the glare of cameras, the judgment of fans, and the silent calculations of insiders. It's rare, and it's compelling. That's why this story resonated beyond gossip sites and social media threads. It became a cultural moment, a microcosm of celebrity life at its most volatile. As the parade unfolded, Meghan's anticipation shifted into something else entirely, a need to assert control where it had been taken away. You could see it in her expressions, in the tension of her body, in the way she interacted with those around her. And as word of her request and its denial spread, first backstage, then to journalists, then across the internet, the scene became a tinderbox of speculation and sensationalism. Every camera angle, every passing comment, every smirk or frown would be analyzed for meaning. Was she furious? Humiliated? Strategically dramatic? The world had to watch, had to judge, and had to react. And react it did. Social media erupted almost immediately. Fans, detractors, insiders, and fellow celebrities all weighed in. Memes were created within hours. Analysts debated whether this was a moment of arrogance or authenticity. Public relations teams scrambled, crafting statements to smooth over the incident, though no one could entirely control the narrative once it had reached the public eye. This was the modern reality of fame. Once the moment happens, it exists forever, replayed, dissected, and shared endlessly. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The parade itself was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, the stakes were higher than anyone realized. Meghan's request to be elevated on a palanquin was not simply about comfort or spectacle. It was a statement of status, a declaration of expectation, a test of influence. And when that statement was denied, the consequences went far beyond a fleeting moment of disappointment. It ignited conflicts, power plays, and emotional explosions that few could have anticipated. So why does this matter to you, the audience? Why should anyone care about Meghan Markle and a palanquin at a parade? Because it's a story about human behavior under pressure, about entitlement versus reality, about how even the most polished public figures can unravel when their expectations collide with limitations. It's a story about spectacle and ego, about the fragile line between admiration and mockery, and about the cultural hunger for drama that Hollywood both feeds and consumes. And just when you think you know what happened, just when you think it's a simple story of a diva being denied, you realize there's more. There are layers, secrets, and reactions that weren't visible on camera. There are power struggles behind the scenes, alliances forming and breaking, strategic moves by staffers and organizers alike. There are reactions from other celebrities, from media outlets, from fans who watched in shock and fascination. The narrative is not linear. It twists, it surprises, and it culminates in moments that no one anticipated. So here's the question that sets the stage for everything that follows. What happens when someone like Meghan Markle is denied the spotlight she feels she deserves? How does she respond? And what does that response reveal about fame, power, and human nature? Have you ever walked into a world where every step is choreographed, every smile calculated, and every gesture scrutinized by thousands of eyes, both in person and through the relentless lens of social media? That is Hollywood in December, and that is the 93rd Annual Hollywood Christmas Parade in 2025. A parade that is more than floats, lights, and marching bands. It is a stage where fame, power, and spectacle collide in a dazzling, sometimes dangerous dance. And on this particular morning, it was about to become the perfect storm for Meghan Markle. The parade has a legacy stretching back nearly a century. It is a tradition steeped in glamour, from its early days of classic Hollywood stars waving from convertible cars to the present era of massive, themed floats, celebrity appearances, and live broadcasts that reach millions around the globe. Behind the glittering veneer, however, lies a meticulous hierarchy. Not everyone can be front and center. Not every celebrity is guaranteed the prime float or the most coveted spotlight. And the parade organizers? They are masters at balancing egos, schedules, and media optics, because one wrong move could turn a magical event into a PR disaster. To understand why Meghan's actions that morning caused such a stir, you have to understand the rules of this world. Celebrities are expected to follow protocol, to respect the hierarchy, to accept the carefully assigned positions without complaint. The parade is as much about public perception as it is about performance. There is a subtle, unspoken understanding. If you demand too much, if you act above the structure, you risk exposure. And yet, Meghan arrived with a vision that challenged every one of those conventions. She didn't just want to walk down the street or ride on a float. She wanted to be elevated, literally, above the crowd, above the other celebrities, above the spectacle itself. She wanted a palanquin, a royal-style platform carried by attendants, designed to make her the center of attention in a way no one else could claim. It was audacious. It was theatrical. And in the context of the Hollywood Christmas parade, it was unprecedented. Backstage, the preparations were a frenzy of activity. Security personnel checked routes, organizers coordinated float schedules, and assistants scurried to ensure every detail was perfect. Everyone was focused, but the air was thick with anticipation. Hollywood thrives on drama, but even they could sense that this wasn't just another celebrity appearance. This was Meghan Markle, a figure who carries the weight of royal history, Hollywood fame, and public fascination, and she had expectations that few dared to question. The parade route stretched for miles, lined with barricades and thousands of fans eager to glimpse their favorite stars. Media crews were positioned at every turn, live streaming, filming, and tweeting every possible moment. The glittering lights reflected off decorations. The artificial snow puffed lazily into the crisp December air, and the floats sparkled with a level of detail that could only come from meticulous planning. It was the perfect setting for spectacle, for heroism, for scandal. As Meghan arrived, she exuded confidence, the kind that comes from someone used to commanding attention. Her entrance was carefully timed to ensure maximum impact. Cameras captured every step, every gesture, every subtle expression. But behind the curated image, backstage whispers grew louder. Staffers discussed her request, some shaking their heads, others concerned about how to manage it without creating a scene. They knew that handling a celebrity like Meghan requires both diplomacy and strategy, because even a minor misstep can escalate into a headline-making incident. And escalate it did. When she first floated the idea of a palanquin, organizers were taken aback. Some initially assumed it was a joke, a theatrical suggestion that would be adjusted into something more practical. But Meghan was serious. She had visualized it, rehearsed it, and expected it to be accommodated. The request was not a casual whim. It was a declaration of intent, a statement of how she wanted to be seen by the world. The denial came in a polite, measured tone. We cannot accommodate that request. The organizers explained logistical constraints, safety concerns, and parade traditions that could not be altered for one participant. Most celebrities would accept this, perhaps grumble privately, perhaps adjust their expectations. But Meghan's response was immediate, intense, and impossible to ignore. She bristled. Her eyes flashed, her posture stiffened. There was a tension in the air that was almost tangible. Onlookers might have thought she was simply checking her hair or adjusting her outfit. But those who were close enough could feel the shift, the subtle but unmistakable surge of indignation, of disappointment turned into fury. This wasn't just about a palanquin. It was about control, status, and recognition. She had envisioned herself as the center of a living tableau, and now that vision had been denied. Backstage, organizers scrambled to contain the situation. They tried to explain the decision again, offering alternatives, suggesting that she ride on a special float with enhanced lighting or positioning. But nothing seemed to quell the rising tension. Meghan's demeanor oscillated between composed frustration and barely restrained anger, a combination that made even seasoned Hollywood staffers uneasy. They had handled demanding stars before, but this was different. There was a volatility here that felt unprecedented, almost unpredictable. And while all this was happening, the fans outside were oblivious. They cheered, waved, and held up signs, unaware of the high-stakes drama unfolding just behind the cameras. This contrast, the public's excitement and Meghan's private frustration, added a layer of irony to the scene. Hollywood thrives on spectacle, but here, the most dramatic moments were invisible to the very audience they were meant to impress. The parade itself began, floats moving slowly down the street, lights shimmering, bands playing festive music. Celebrities smiled and waved, performing for the cameras with practiced ease. Meghan was present, poised, glamorous, but there was an undercurrent of tension. She moved with a deliberate grace, her expressions measured, yet those who were close enough could see the storm beneath the surface. And then, as the cameras shifted, as the parade continued down the route, the situation reached a breaking point. Meghan's desire for elevation, for spectacle, for recognition, collided with the reality of parade logistics and Hollywood hierarchy. The denial of the palanquin was no longer a minor inconvenience. It had become a challenge to her identity, to her sense of entitlement, to the way she believed she should be perceived. The backstage chaos intensified. Staffers whispered urgently, security personnel repositioned themselves, and organizers debated how to handle the situation without creating a public spectacle. Every second felt magnified, every gesture scrutinized. And Meghan? She was already plotting, mentally rehearsing her response, her indignation, her statement to the world. Even if that statement would be subtle, even if it would take the form of a look, a gesture, or a carefully curated social media post. But here's the crucial point. This was not just about Meghan Markle. This was about the collision of expectation and reality, about how fame, privilege, and desire for control play out under the glare of public attention. It was about what happens when someone accustomed to commanding attention is told, unequivocally, that the spotlight will not bend to their wishes. And it was about the consequences, immediate, visible, and unforgettable, that would follow from this clash. So, as the floats moved down Hollywood Boulevard, as fans cheered and cameras rolled, a quiet tension hung in the air. Meghan's vision had been denied, her request refused, and the stakes had never been higher. Everyone knew, organizers, staffers, insiders, that this was more than a parade. This was a test of patience, a test of ego, and a test of how a celebrity would respond when confronted with limits. And the answer to that test was about to reveal itself in ways that would shock everyone present and the world beyond. What does it take to imagine yourself above the crowd? To envision an entrance so grand, so unforgettable, that everyone watching instantly knows you belong at the center of attention? For Meghan Markle, it was more than imagination. It was a blueprint, a plan, and an expectation all rolled into one. And her vision for the 93rd Annual Hollywood Christmas Parade in 2025 was nothing short of audacious. She didn't just want to be seen. She wanted to be elevated, literally, on a palanquin carried by attendants, towering above the other celebrities and the crowd alike. Think about it for a moment. A palanquin is not casual. It's a symbol steeped in history, associated with royalty, power, and untouchable status. To request such treatment at a Hollywood parade is not just ambitious. It's revolutionary. Celebrities parade, ride floats, wave, smile, and perhaps have a spotlight on them. But to ask to be physically elevated in this way signals an expectation of reverence, a desire to become a living spectacle. And Meghan? She fully intended to make that spectacle her own. Her team had spent weeks planning the logistics. They researched precedent, designed mock-ups, and rehearsed the choreography. Every detail was considered. The height of the platform, the number of attendants, the angles for the cameras, the choreography of her hand gestures and smiles. Meghan imagined herself gliding above the parade route, every eye fixed on her, every flash of the camera capturing her magnificence. It wasn't a whim. It was a carefully orchestrated statement about status, power, and presence. But vision alone doesn't make it happen. There are rules in Hollywood, subtle yet rigid, about who can command such spectacle. There are hierarchies of fame, alliances with organizers, and unwritten codes about timing and logistics. Even the most famous stars cannot bend reality to their desires without consequence. Meghan's request, while daring, collided directly with these rules. The organizers had to weigh safety, fairness, and precedent against the demands of a celebrity accustomed to bending the world to her will. Her anticipation was tangible. She arrived that morning with an aura of expectation, her posture and gaze carefully crafted to convey confidence and poise. Every step she took backstage was measured, every glance intentional. Meghan didn't just want to participate, she wanted to dominate. She wanted to transform the parade into her stage, the spectators into witnesses of her grandeur. And in her mind, the palanquin was the centerpiece, the crowning jewel of her performance. But vision has a way of clashing with reality. When the organizers heard the request, there was hesitation. A palanquin was unprecedented at this event. They weren't sure if it could be accommodated safely. They debated the logistics, attendance to carry it, stability, maneuverability along crowded streets, and the reaction of other celebrities who might feel overshadowed. It was a Pandora's box of potential problems, and yet Meghan remained resolute. She wasn't asking politely, she was asserting expectation. And that expectation would not be ignored. As the hours ticked down to the start of the parade, the tension backstage grew. Assistants ran final checks, float decorations were adjusted, and security reviewed every possible scenario. All the while, Meghan rehearsed her mental script. She imagined the waves of adoration, the flashing cameras, the gasps of the crowd as she rose above everyone else. Her vision was precise, vivid, and unapologetically ambitious. But ambition, as history shows, often comes with obstacles. Imagine being in her shoes for a moment. Months of planning, anticipation, and visualization reduced to a single word. No. Polite, firm, unavoidable. What would you do? Would you accept it with grace, or would you respond in kind? Meghan's reaction would reveal more than frustration. It would reveal the intensity of her desire for control, her unwillingness to be minimized, and her instinct to assert dominance even when circumstances pushed back. Backstage, whispers grew louder. Some staffers tried to placate her, offering compromises, suggesting alternative floats or elevated platforms. But Meghan's mind was already elsewhere. The palanquin was not negotiable. It was the centerpiece of her narrative. She didn't want substitutes. She didn't want improvisation. She wanted perfection, pageantry, and elevation. And when she didn't get it, the simmering tension transformed into visible agitation. Her vision was also deeply tied to her identity. Meghan has long straddled the line between celebrity and royalty, between Hollywood and the global stage. Every appearance is an opportunity to reinforce that identity, to remind the public, the media, and her peers that she is not just another star. A palanquin would have been a tangible representation of that identity, a literal elevation of her status in the eyes of everyone watching. Denial, therefore, was not just a logistical challenge, it was an existential affront. As the parade route buzzed with excitement, Meghan's internal monologue was a mix of anticipation, calculation, and frustration. How could they not see her vision? How could they deny her the spectacle she had carefully crafted? It was a clash of worlds. Her world of personal narrative, meticulous planning, and expectation, versus the real world of rules, safety, and precedent. And in that clash, tension began to spill outward. Fans outside the barricades had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. They cheered, waved, and held up signs, excited to see their favorite celebrities. But Meghan's world was smaller, more intense, a bubble of ambition and expectation that had collided violently with reality. Every glance backstage, every whisper among staffers, every adjustment of equipment was a reminder that her vision might not come to fruition. And that possibility was unacceptable. But ambition alone is rarely enough. It needs opportunity, timing, and leverage. Meghan had carefully studied the parade's dynamics, the camera placements, the timing of each float. She had considered every angle, every position, every potential distraction. Her plan was a masterclass in anticipation, a blueprint for spectacle. And yet, despite all the preparation, the refusal of her palanquin forced her to improvise, to pivot, to confront an unexpected challenge. And that pivot would define the morning. Meghan's reaction was about to be observed by more people than she had imagined. Not just the organizers, not just the backstage staff, but the cameras, the press, and eventually, the world. Every gesture, every word, every expression was amplified, recorded, and analyzed. The denial of her vision had set in motion a chain of events that would ripple far beyond the parade route. As the floats began to move, the crowds cheered, and the festive music played, Meghan's anticipation transformed into determination. She had a vision. She had a plan. And even if the palanquin was denied, she would find a way to assert her presence, to command attention, to ensure that everyone watching, both on the street and through screens around the globe, would not forget her. Imagine standing at the edge of your carefully constructed fantasy, only to have it ripped away in a single moment. For Meghan Markle at the 93rd Annual Hollywood Christmas Parade in 2025, that moment arrived with a calm, seemingly innocuous sentence. "We cannot accommodate your request." Just 7 words. Yet the weight they carried was monumental. The palanquin she had envisioned, rehearsed, and demanded was denied, not because of lack of will or admiration, but because logistics, safety, and tradition could not bend to accommodate her personal spectacle. It was the kind of rejection few experience in such a public arena. Not a polite decline at a private dinner, not a delayed email from an assistant, but a direct, firm refusal in a high-stakes environment, surrounded by dozens of organizers, staffers, and a few insiders who had anticipated a smoother interaction. For someone accustomed to influence and attention, it was a blow, a challenge to her authority and identity. Meghan's initial response was almost imperceptible to the casual observer. A tightening of the jaw, a subtle narrowing of her eyes, the tilt of her head, as if weighing whether this was a mistake she could correct. But for those close enough to witness it, the reaction was electric. It was as though the air had shifted. The backstage atmosphere, already tense with anticipation, thickened with the unspoken threat of confrontation. She wasn't just disappointed. She was furious, and furious in a way that signaled the situation had escalated beyond mere logistics. What makes this moment so compelling is how unusual it was in context. Hollywood has seen diva behavior, tantrums over wardrobe, insults over scheduling conflicts. Celebrities can be demanding, dramatic, and even difficult. But Meghan's request and the subsequent refusal were different. This was not an ordinary parade or a trivial disagreement. This was about visibility, status, and the manifestation of personal narrative. It was about being seen exactly as she wanted to be seen, in a way that defied the rules of the event. And when denied, her reaction set off a chain of subtle yet powerful shifts. Organizers quickly realized that handling a celebrity of Meghan's stature required finesse. They attempted softening language, proposing compromises, perhaps an elevated float, perhaps special lighting, perhaps a more prominent placement along the route. But Meghan was not interested in compromise. The palanquin was non-negotiable in her mind. It wasn't a whim. It was a centerpiece of her plan to dominate the parade visually, to assert herself as untouchable, elevated both literally and figuratively above everyone else. As word of her reaction spread backstage, tension mounted. Security personnel exchanged quick glances. Assistants whispered urgently, trying to anticipate what might happen next. Staffers who had prepared for months for a seamless parade suddenly found themselves navigating emotional volatility in real time. The situation, initially a logistical concern, was rapidly becoming a test of crisis management, public relations, and human patience. Meanwhile, outside the backstage bubble, the parade was in full swing. The streets of Hollywood Boulevard were lined with thousands of cheering fans. Cameras captured every float, every celebrity, every moment of festivity. The public remained blissfully unaware that behind the curtains of glitter and lights, a storm was brewing. This contrast, the sparkling public spectacle and the tense backstage drama, added layers of irony, suspense, and complexity to the story. The people on the street were enjoying the show, but the real drama was unfolding where they couldn't see it. Meghan's fury, however, did not remain contained. Observers backstage noted a rapid escalation. Sharp words exchanged with assistants, tense body language during coordination meetings, and subtle acts of defiance. She walked with purpose, eyes scanning for any signs of compliance or acknowledgement, every movement deliberate. The denial of her palanquin had ignited not just frustration, but an urgent need to assert herself. She was unwilling to let this setback be unnoticed or forgotten. And the implications went beyond mere personal ego. Her visible frustration sent shockwaves through the organizational structure. Assistants were caught between duty and discretion, unsure whether to defend her, placate her, or maintain protocol. Organizers faced a dilemma: acquiesce to her demands and set a precedent, or uphold the rules and risk a public confrontation. The tension was almost tangible, a high-stakes game of anticipation, reaction, and negotiation, all unfolding in real time. Even those accustomed to Hollywood chaos were stunned. Celebrities often make demands, but Meghan's request carried a unique intensity. She wasn't seeking comfort, convenience, or minor embellishments. She was asserting a level of spectacle that challenged the established order. And when that challenge was refused, it was not simply disappointment. It was a public snub, a violation of expectation, and a spark that could ignite controversy. The moment of rejection also highlighted a critical human truth. Even those who are celebrated, admired, and influential are vulnerable to denial. Ambition, pride, and expectation meet an immovable obstacle, and reactions are rarely predictable. In Meghan's case, her public image of composure and charisma collided with the raw, unfiltered human response to being denied something deeply desired. It was a rare glimpse behind the carefully constructed persona, a crack in the polished veneer that revealed determination, indignation, and fierce insistence on acknowledgement. And as the parade continued, Meghan's tension became increasingly evident. Subtle gestures, a pointed look, a hand pressed to the side of her face, a sharp inhale, spoke volumes. Insiders described these cues as precursors to action, signs that the refusal would not be the end of the story. The energy backstage shifted. Organizers, assistants, and security realized they were now participants in a drama they had not anticipated, watching the unfolding consequences of a single denial. But the public, as always, only saw fragments. Cameras caught Meghan walking along the route, smiling, waving, appearing composed. To the casual viewer, everything seemed normal. To those in the know, however, every gesture carried weight. Every glance was loaded with meaning, and every interaction backstage hinted at an impending escalation. This is where the tension of the narrative deepens, the divide between perception and reality, between public presentation and private turmoil. And then came the first signs of escalation that could not be contained. A staffer mentioned a minor logistical adjustment. A float placement, a timing cue, something that, under normal circumstances, would pass unnoticed. Meghan's response was immediate and emphatic, a clear assertion of her dissatisfaction. It was no longer a polite negotiation or backstage whisper. It was the beginning of a very visible reaction that would soon ripple outward. This was more than a simple no. It was a public snub with layers of significance. It tested patience, power, and protocol. It challenged assumptions about how a celebrity should behave and how an organization should respond. And it forced everyone involved to make quick decisions, balancing safety, optics, and diplomacy in a high-stakes environment where every second counted. What made this moment unforgettable, however, was not just the denial itself, but the way Meghan responded. She didn't retreat quietly, she didn't accept compromise passively, and she didn't allow the moment to pass. She asserted herself, making it clear, through gestures, posture, and subtle expressions, that she was not willing to be diminished. And in doing so, she transformed a logistical denial into a dramatic turning point, a story that would reverberate far beyond the parade route. You think the Hollywood Christmas parade is all smiles, glitter, and festive music? Think again. For every wave to the crowd, every sparkling float, there's a hidden world of tension, politics, and backstage drama that few ever see. And on the morning of the 93rd Annual Hollywood Christmas Parade in 2025, that hidden world erupted into chaos, all centered around one figure, Meghan Markle. When Meghan's request for a palanquin was denied, the ripple effect was immediate. Backstage, it wasn't just disappointment, it was a storm. Assistants rushed to diffuse tension, security personnel repositioned themselves to anticipate any flare-ups, and organizers scrambled to ensure the parade would proceed without visible disruption. Every movement, every word, every gesture was under scrutiny, both by those present and by the invisible eyes of social media that would later capture fragments of the unfolding drama. The atmosphere backstage became thick with anticipation. Staffers whispered, some nervously, others firmly trying to maintain control. It was as if time slowed, each second stretched by the weight of uncertainty. Would Meghan accept a compromise, or would her anger spill over into something larger, something uncontainable? Everyone knew that managing a celebrity of her stature required diplomacy, subtlety, and an understanding of ego on a monumental scale. One wrong move could turn a minor incident into a viral scandal. Meghan, meanwhile, was not passive. Every step she took backstage exuded both confidence and defiance. She moved with precision, as though calculating each reaction, each glance, each gesture to assert dominance and command attention. Staffers described moments where she would pause, eyes sweeping the room, a sharp intake of breath, a tilt of the head that spoke volumes. Every detail of her behavior was a statement. She would not be ignored, she would not be minimized, and she would ensure her presence was felt. This is where Hollywood's backstage dynamics become fascinating. There are hierarchies, invisible rules, and unspoken expectations about how a celebrity should behave. Most stars know their place, follow protocols, and accept the choreography behind the scenes. But Meghan's reaction challenged every one of those norms. Her insistence on elevation, both literally and figuratively, forced organizers and staffers into uncharted territory. They had to navigate her demands while keeping the parade on schedule, managing other celebrities' expectations, and maintaining public perception. Whispers escalated to hushed debates. Some suggested creating a makeshift elevated platform. Others proposed additional camera angles to emphasize her presence without physically raising her above the crowd. But nothing satisfied Meghan's vision. She wanted the palanquin, the symbol of untouchable status, and nothing else would suffice. The tension became almost tangible, a pressure cooker of frustration, ambition, and anticipation. Security personnel watched closely. Their role was not just to protect, but to anticipate potential escalations. They noticed subtle signs, a tightening of the jaw, a sharp glance at an assistant, a sudden change in posture. These were cues that a person with influence, ambition, and determination could react unpredictably if denied. While there had been demanding stars before, Meghan's presence carried a unique intensity, a blend of celebrity, royalty, and public expectation that amplified every action. Even organizers who had decades of experience admitted to feeling unprepared. The parade is a finely tuned machine, and every disruption risks both safety and spectacle. Yet Meghan's refusal to compromise introduced an element of volatility that was impossible to ignore. The denial of the palanquin had become more than a logistical issue. It had become a test of leadership, patience, and crisis management. Meanwhile, assistants tried to maintain composure. They offered alternatives, subtle suggestions, and softening language to de-escalate. But each attempt was met with a quiet intensity, a steely gaze that communicated, this was non-negotiable. Meghan's vision, her expectation of elevation, and her demand for recognition were unwavering. Behind the glittering facade of smiles and waves, a silent war of wills was unfolding. The stakes grew higher when other celebrities arrived. Some observed Meghan's tension, reading it as frustration, others as calculated performance. A few backstage veterans murmured to each other, noting that while diva behavior is common, this level of insistence, backed by a refusal to compromise, was rare, even in Hollywood. Meghan's demand had not just disrupted logistics. It had unsettled the established order of celebrity hierarchy and backstage management. And then came the first signs of visible escalation. A minor logistical issue, a repositioned float, a delayed cue, was met with a sharp reaction. Meghan's voice, though controlled, carried unmistakable firmness. Her gestures, precise and deliberate, communicated displeasure to anyone within view. The backstage team realized that this was no longer a matter of negotiation. They were now managing a high-stakes personality crisis in real time, with cameras, fans, and public perception looming just beyond the curtain. This was not just about Meghan's ego. It was about control, influence, and narrative. Her insistence on being elevated, on being the focal point of attention, represented a broader theme of celebrity culture, the demand to be seen as exceptional, untouchable, and central. The denial of that platform, both literally and figuratively, was a challenge to her identity and her carefully crafted public persona. And the ripple effect extended beyond backstage. Even small signs of her frustration, tightened lips, a sharp hand gesture, a pointed remark, were noticed by media insiders and passing journalists. While cameras were focused on the floats and the spectacle of the parade, some of the subtle cues of backstage tension began to leak out. By the time the parade was in full swing, the story of Meghan's denied request had already begun circulating in whispers, setting the stage for social media amplification, fan speculation, and eventual media frenzy. The contrast between public performance and private turmoil could not have been more dramatic. Outside, the parade was moving forward as if nothing had happened. Fans cheered, music played, and floats glimmered under the December sun. Inside, behind the scenes, a storm raged. Meghan's expectation had collided with reality, and the fallout was becoming increasingly difficult to contain. The organizers, assistants, and security personnel were now all part of a tense ballet of crisis management, trying to balance her needs with the logistical realities of the event. And as the first half of the parade progressed, Meghan's presence became both a challenge and a spectacle in itself. Every smile, every gesture, every moment of composure was layered with tension, signaling to the attentive backstage and a few informed media members. This was far from over. The denied palanquin was more than a moment. It was a catalyst, and the consequences of that catalyst would ripple outward, impacting the flow of the parade, the reactions of fellow celebrities, and ultimately, the public perception of Meghan Markle in ways no one anticipated. Hollywood is a city built on image. Every step is photographed, every gesture analyzed, and every word dissected. For celebrities, the line between private and public blurs constantly, and at the 93rd Annual Hollywood Christmas Parade in 2025, that line was about to evaporate entirely. Meghan Markle, already simmering with frustration over her denied palanquin request, now had to navigate not only backstage tension, but also the relentless gaze of cameras, media crews, and thousands of live spectators. Imagine standing there, lights glaring, cameras rolling, crowds cheering, and your carefully constructed plan to dominate the parade in literal and figurative height denied. What do you do? Do you retreat? Do you smile politely, pretend nothing happened, and fade into the background? Or do you assert yourself, making your displeasure visible without breaking the facade entirely? Meghan, as everyone would soon realize, chose the latter. The cameras were everywhere. On floats, mounted along the parade route, handheld by journalists running alongside the spectacle. They captured every glittering detail, the marching bands, the floats shimmering in festive lights, the stars waving to their fans. But they were also capturing subtle cues, almost imperceptible to the crowd, but clear to those trained in reading celebrity behavior. A tightened jaw, a sharp glance, a measured pause. These were all signals, a silent language of frustration, defiance, and determination. Meghan's team tried to manage the optics. Her public composure had to be maintained. She had built her reputation on a carefully curated image of grace, poise, and influence. The cameras couldn't show her throwing a tantrum, yet they would inevitably capture the tension if it slipped through even briefly. Her aides whispered suggestions, guided her movements, and attempted to smooth over any visible irritation. But Meghan's presence was already electric, and subtle tension radiated outward in waves that even the most skilled PR handler could not entirely control. Meanwhile, the crowd outside remained oblivious to the backstage storm. Fans cheered, waved signs, and captured the parade on their phones. To them, Meghan appeared elegant, smiling, and engaged, gliding along the route as if nothing had happened. But the cameras, especially those trained on angles capturing body language and subtle reactions, began to tell a different story. Observers could see the tension in her posture, the intensity in her eyes, and the almost imperceptible flares of frustration that betrayed the calm exterior. It's in these moments that public figures are most vulnerable. The pressure to maintain composure while managing disappointment is immense, especially when the world is watching. Meghan's reaction to the denied palanquin became a delicate balancing act. She needed to assert her presence and signal dissatisfaction without allowing the cameras to capture outright conflict. Every movement was calculated, yet every calculation risked being interpreted incorrectly by thousands of viewers. Social media, of course, didn't wait. Within minutes of the parade's broadcast beginning, threads started appearing on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Observers dissected body language, speculated about tensions backstage, and debated what Meghan's subtle cues meant. Memes circulated depicting imagined palanquins and exaggerated reactions, fueling public fascination and amplifying the drama. The denied request, once a private backstage matter, had become a viral talking point before the parade even ended. The duality of Meghan's situation was stark. Publicly, she appeared elegant and engaged. Privately, she navigated frustration, calculation, and mounting pressure. This tension between the person seen on camera and the person navigating backstage dynamics is what makes celebrity culture so compelling. It's the invisible struggle, the unspoken drama, that draws audiences in, making every movement, every glance, and every smile a potential headline. Cameras followed her movements along the parade route, capturing moments of poised wave, polite smiles, and interactions with other celebrities. Yet behind these gestures, every subtle motion carried weight. The slight tilt of her head toward an assistant, a hand lightly touching her cheek, a controlled but firm exhale, all spoke to the simmering tension beneath the surface. Observers familiar with celebrity behavior recognized these as precursors to escalation, subtle but undeniable signs that the situation was far from resolved. Even photographers backstage began to whisper among themselves. Usually, the parade offered predictable shots, smiling celebrities, glittering floats, and enthusiastic fans. But Meghan's subtle responses, her controlled yet evident displeasure, created opportunities for narratives and speculation. For media professionals, it was a moment of raw human emotion framed within the polished veneer of Hollywood spectacle, a rare glimpse behind the curtain. Her public engagement was a masterclass in controlled emotion. She smiled at fans, waved gracefully, and acknowledged cameras, all while processing the denied request internally. It's a skill honed over years in the public eye, projecting calm, maintaining poise, and managing perception while privately navigating disappointment and anger. This duality, public grace versus private frustration, creates tension that audiences instinctively feel, even if they cannot fully articulate it. As the parade continued, Meghan's tension influenced not only her movements, but also the atmosphere around her. Assistants worked harder, anticipating reactions. Security personnel stayed alert, watching subtle shifts in posture. Other celebrities adjusted their own behavior, either to distance themselves from potential flare-ups or to observe the unfolding drama. Every person in proximity became part of the high-stakes balancing act, aware that one misstep could turn a tense backstage moment into a public spectacle. But it wasn't just about maintaining composure. Meghan's response to the cameras was strategic. She understood that the parade itself was a live performance, and that every image, every frame, would eventually reach millions. By maintaining controlled poise while hinting at dissatisfaction, she ensured that the story of her denied palanquin would leak organically, sparking intrigue and speculation. It was both a reaction and a calculated maneuver, demonstrating her understanding of celebrity dynamics in an era dominated by instant media. And the fans, unaware of the backstage tension, cheered louder as the parade moved along its route. They saw glamour, festivity, and elegance. They didn't see the subtle choreography of frustration and strategy unfolding behind the scenes, nor did they anticipate the events that would soon elevate this incident from minor backstage drama to headline-making spectacle. As the cameras captured every wave, every smile, every gesture, it became clear. Meghan Markle had turned a denied request into a narrative that could not be ignored. The story was no longer just about logistics or a palanquin. It was about human ambition, celebrity culture, public perception, and the complex dance between private emotion and public image. And just when the parade seemed to continue smoothly, the first cracks began to appear in the carefully constructed facade. A gesture, a glance, a momentary flare of irritation, all captured by cameras and noticed by insiders, signaled that the situation was about to escalate beyond controlled subtlety. Tensions had been building all morning, simmering just below the surface of polite smiles and orchestrated waves. Backstage, the atmosphere was taut, charged with anticipation and the faint crackle of looming conflict. And then it happened, the first real confrontation. Not a public spectacle yet, not a headline moment captured by millions of viewers, but a collision of wills that would ignite the drama that followed. Meghan Markle, still smarting from the denied palanquin, found herself face-to-face with one of the parade organizers. This was not a casual exchange. The organizer, experienced and poised, had been responsible for coordinating the route, float placements, and celebrity positions. They had spent weeks ensuring the parade would run smoothly. Yet here they were, confronted by a celebrity whose expectations defied every rule of logistics and hierarchy. The tension was immediate. Meghan's eyes narrowed slightly, her posture stiffened, and a controlled intensity radiated from her as she spoke. Every word was deliberate, every gesture precise. "I just don't understand why this isn't possible," she said, her tone polite but loaded with implication. It was a statement that communicated disbelief, frustration, and subtle challenge all at once. The organizer, though calm, could feel the weight of her gaze, the force of her presence pressing against the boundaries of backstage protocol. "You know why?" The organizer replied evenly. "Safety, logistics, tradition. We simply cannot accommodate a palanquin." The words were measured, but they carried authority. It was a refusal wrapped in professionalism, but to Meghan, it was a barrier that challenged both her vision and her perceived status. The room seemed to hold its breath. Assistants leaned in, ready to intervene, to smooth the conversation, to redirect Meghan's energy. Security personnel subtly shifted, recognizing that even controlled confrontation can escalate quickly. Every other staffer, veteran and newcomer alike, watched with a mix of awe, apprehension, and anticipation. This was no ordinary celebrity disagreement. It was an exhibition of power, ambition, and human will, all unfolding under the pressure of high stakes and cameras waiting just beyond the curtain. Meghan's reaction was strategic. She did not explode, she did not shout. Instead, she employed a quiet, intense method of confrontation, a look, a pause, a carefully chosen word. She asked questions designed to unsettle, phrases that implied both disappointment and incredulity. Is there truly no way to adjust the schedule or the flow positions? Surely something can be done. The repeated insistence was not just about logistics. It was about testing boundaries, probing for compliance, and asserting dominance. The organizer remained firm, but the intensity of the interaction was undeniable. Backstage, whispers began to circulate. "This is intense," one assistant muttered. "I've never seen her like this before," another replied. The confrontation was subtle to the casual observer, but to those present, it was electrifying. A collision of vision versus reality, ambition versus protocol, desire versus impossibility. Meanwhile, Meghan's team attempted to intervene diplomatically. They suggested alternatives, ways to elevate her presence without the palanquin, adjustments to the float or camera angles that could give the illusion of height. But Meghan, having envisioned the palanquin as the centerpiece, dismissed these compromises with quiet firmness. To her, these were insufficient. They were substitutes, not solutions. And in her mind, the denial had transformed into a slight, a challenge to her identity, a question of her ability to control the narrative. The organizer, sensing the rising tension, leaned slightly forward, trying to assert authority while maintaining calm. "We have considered every option. We cannot compromise safety or tradition. Your place on the parade route is carefully planned. That is the maximum accommodation we can provide." The words were measured, professional, but each syllable was heavy with finality. That finality did not sit well with Meghan. Her eyes flashed, subtle but unmistakable, signaling the storm beneath the composed exterior. She had encountered denials before, but this one was public adjacent, visible to insiders, imminent for cameras, and impossible to ignore. The denied palanquin had become more than logistics. It was an affront, a challenge to her identity, and a spark that ignited a tense confrontation with palpable stakes. And then came the subtle escalation, a gesture, a tilt of the head, a tightening of the jaw. Meghan leaned slightly forward, voice measured but firm, emphasizing the intensity of her frustration. She made it clear, she would not be minimized, she would not be invisible, and she would not accept compromise that failed to align with her vision. Every word, every gesture, Every pause was calibrated to communicate dissatisfaction while maintaining a veneer of public composure. The organizer, experienced and unflappable, tried to hold the line. But even they could feel the pressure mounting, the stakes intensifying. A minor misstep could transform a controlled discussion into a public spectacle. And in Hollywood, such spectacles are never forgotten. The tension was a delicate balancing act, a test of patience, negotiation, and the subtle dynamics of power. Backstage, assistants and security personnel were in high alert. Any sudden movement could escalate the situation, and everyone knew that the eyes of the world were, indirectly, upon them. This was not simply a disagreement. It was a strategic confrontation, with observation, optics, and performance woven into every interaction. The denied palanquin had become a symbol, a focal point for tension, ambition, and the collision between expectation and reality. And the confrontation didn't end there. It rippled outward, subtly affecting interactions with other celebrities, the positioning of floats, and even the choreography of the parade itself. Meghan's energy was magnetic, influencing everyone nearby, creating tension that could be felt, if not yet seen, by the audience. Those closest to her realized that this was not just a minor flare-up. It was a pivotal moment, one that would define how the rest of the parade unfolded and how the story would later be told. But just when it seemed that calm might return, Meghan made a subtle but decisive move. A gesture, a shift in posture, a look that signaled she was ready to escalate, to assert herself beyond backstage whispers and polite refusals. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The 93rd annual Hollywood Christmas Parade was supposed to be a celebration, a glittering spectacle of lights, music, and celebrity cheer. For the thousands of fans lining Hollywood Boulevard, it was a chance to see stars up close, snap photos, and feel a connection to glamour. But on this December morning in 2025, something unusual began to ripple through the crowd. Something they couldn't name yet, but would feel immediately. Tension. It started subtly. Meghan Markle, moving along the parade route, smiled at fans and waved politely, but there was a sharpness to her gestures, an intensity behind the grace. A few keen-eyed spectators noticed the flicker of frustration in her eyes, the tension in her posture, the brief moments where a smile seemed forced rather than natural. To the casual observer, she appeared poised and elegant, but the energy radiating from her was different. It was not mere performance. It was a controlled reaction to something denied, something withheld, and the crowd, unconsciously, felt it. Meanwhile, cameras mounted along the route began capturing more than the usual parade footage. Flashes of subtle irritation, brief pauses, and micro-expressions were caught and streamed to monitors for producers, reporters, and social media audiences. The backstage storm, once invisible, had begun to leak into public perception. And in the age of instant media, subtlety rarely remains private. Within minutes, whispers about Meghan's demeanor began spreading online, creating a buzz that juxtaposed the festive cheer with speculation about her mood. Fans began to speculate. Some thought she was just tired, overworked, or affected by the December chill. Others, however, noticed the sharper movements, the intensity in her eyes, and started to comment on social media with a mix of curiosity and concern. "She looks annoyed," one tweet read. "Why does she keep glancing at her team?" Another noted. Memes appeared almost immediately, joking about diva behavior, palanquins, and subtle snubs, spreading the backstage story far beyond the immediate audience. And yet, Meghan did not break. She maintained her public poise, aware that cameras were capturing every frame. Her gestures were precise, her smiles calculated, and her movements deliberate. But the subtle tension in her energy was palpable, an invisible current that both backstage staff and observant fans could feel. This was not an outburst. It was controlled intensity, a force that suggested, without saying explicitly, that the situation backstage was far from resolved. Other celebrities on the route began to sense the tension as well. Some noticed the intensity radiating from Meghan, adjusting their own behavior accordingly. Others whispered among themselves, curious about the energy she projected. There was a magnetic quality to her presence now, one that drew attention not only from fans, but from those navigating the parade logistics. Her denied palanquin had transformed into something bigger, a signal, a spectacle, and an unspoken challenge to the established flow of the parade. Media crews quickly picked up on subtle cues. Producers noticed slight hesitations, micro-reactions, and brief flashes of irritation in Meghan's demeanor. Even without knowing the backstage details, they could sense the unfolding drama and began to plan coverage angles that would capture these subtle but telling moments. This was the kind of material that could dominate entertainment news, social media discussions, and late-night commentary. And within moments, it began to ripple outward, far beyond Hollywood Boulevard. The crowd, though largely unaware of the specific backstage conflict, reacted instinctively to energy. Humans are wired to perceive subtle shifts in tone, posture, and expression, especially in someone with Meghan's charisma and stage presence. Fans noticed a difference in her wave, a tension in her steps, and the way her eyes scanned her team. Something had changed in the parade's energy, and the audience responded with increased curiosity and attention. What was happening behind the smiles? What was causing the shift in demeanor? Questions began to form, even if answers were not yet known. And then came a moment that turned speculation into spectacle. Meghan, walking alongside her float, paused briefly, her gaze directed toward her team and the parade organizer. It was not dramatic, not overtly confrontational, but it was loaded with meaning. The cameras captured it. The crowd sensed it. Social media buzzed. What had started as backstage tension now began to spill into the public eye. Observers speculated. Was she upset? Was there a dispute? Was this the famous diva behavior everyone joked about, or something deeper? At this point, the narrative was beginning to form outside of Meghan's control. The denied palanquin, initially a private matter, had become a public story in miniature. Every gesture she made, every glance she directed, and every subtle expression was amplified by the crowd, the media, and social networks. The moment that started as a logistical denial backstage was now evolving into a multi-layered spectacle. Personal frustration, public perception, and media amplification intertwined into a single, compelling story. Backstage, the team observed the effect with a mixture of awe and anxiety. Meghan's energy had spilled into the crowd, changing the atmosphere on the parade route. Assistants whispered urgently, trying to ensure